Hello and welcome to another episode of ERG PowerTalk. I'm your host, Joe Santana. That song clip is from a song called The Power, performed by a group called Snap, and it appeared in a movie called Bruce Almighty. And it sums up how Jim Carrey felt when playing the lead character, Bruce Nolan. He first discovered that he had been granted godlike powers. And it's my hope that by the end of this program, you'll feel just as uplifted and empowered as you discover the many ways in which you have the power to be of huge value to your organization and your CEO. And to help us along on this journey of discovery, we have a special guest today, Catherine Jacobson. Kathy is president and CEO of Froedtert Health. And Froedtert ranks at the top of a bunch of lists as a top healthcare provider and an employer. And Kathy is recognized as a vocal DEI champion in her community who's taken a big lead in embracing and leveraging her company's BRG. So Kathy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe.
So Kathy, your company is one of the earliest supporters of this podcast, which is designed to educate and inspire resource group leaders beyond the gates of your organization. Why is this work so important to you personally?
You know, I think all of us look at all of our diversity and inclusion efforts. And I think when you're on this journey, you kind of start with, well, it's the right thing to do. But then what really makes it important for business is it's actually the essential thing to do for you to be successful in any business. And I think even more particularly so for those of us who are in healthcare, just because we are community assets in such large an employer and make such a huge impact on our community. For me personally, I have seen bad decisions be made because the right voices weren't at the table. And it was never intentional. It was just that people used and drew on the experiences that they had without even recognizing that they weren't covering the experiences of sometimes the very people who were impacted by the decisions that they were making. And I've seen that throughout my career of over 35 plus years. We're better at it today, but I still think that we have some way to go with that. And then I think finally, you know, why our BRGs, our business resource groups, is they're so critical to getting on the ground and getting that intelligence from those other folks who might not have voices around the table about how we can be better serving our community and addressing the needs of our stakeholders. And that's why they're so critical to our overall strategy.
Yeah, that's great. Kathy, in earlier discussions that you and I had, when I asked you why you engage so directly with your company's resource groups, you gave me a really simple, but I think powerful answer. You basically said it's because they know stuff I don't know. So tell us how you first discovered that value in your BRGs.
Sure. We serve a large, very diverse urban area, and we have multiple stakeholders who look upon us to be able to serve our community and provide them healthcare. And our executive team, as much as we may be working to bring in more diverse insights, just simply doesn't have all the insights of all of our stakeholders. And so by me being able to have conversations with our BRGs, whether it's our leaders that we do once a year during strategic planning, or more of an intimate conversation with all the members of that particular BRG, they will bring up insights about experiences that their members have had that none of us can fathom, and that we actually have to take into account as we start thinking about how we're going to address the needs of that specific community. For me, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have thought about the fact that people want to have caregivers that look like them. They're far more comfortable in an environment that way. So now that's obviously something we strive to do, whether it's a physician, a nurse, or something like that. How people treat different groups of people when they walk in our halls. I don't know that, but the things that my own staff or our patients reflect back to us that happen even in our own hallways are, to me, appalling. So how do we fix that? I wouldn't even know it's existing, if we didn't have those insights that are in there. So that's what I mean about you really have to be able to walk in someone's shoes. In the absence of being able to do that walk yourself, you have to start being able to talk to those people and get those insights directly from those people.
Yeah. So what are some examples of some benefits that you've personally gotten out of your relationship with resource group members?
I would say personally is that it kind of it doubles down on the work you still have to do. Especially when I was having a conversation with all the BRG members, and they would open up to me about some of the experiences that they had either in our community outside our four walls, or even within our four walls. You really knew that even though we've been at this work for over a decade, we are a leader, we've been at it for a really long time. We may be doing some things a lot better. We hire much more diverse people, but we lose people because now we have to work on the inclusion part. And when you have those conversations, you recognize how much more work you really have to do. Sometimes I would like to pat myself on the back and say, wow, we're doing a really great job on that hiring stuff. We're not doing a really great job on the inclusion side. And that's why more people are leaving. So you get those resources as to the why and what's still going on when you really have a conversation. And that makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think are some key factors that help a CEO and resource group leaders to work together? What takes the friction out of that? Because you've got so many people in the organization. You clearly have so many different responsibilities. So you want to make that as frictionless as possible. How do you do that, Kathy?
So I think for us, and I really do think it's a secret sauce in terms of our diversity and inclusion efforts, is that we don't have a separate D&I plan over here. It is integrated into our strategic plan. So quite frankly, between me and our BRGs, we're working towards the same goals because they're one set of goals. They're one set of strategic plan. The BRGs are a mechanism to help us achieve the same goals. So we are from the very beginning aligned because they have the same goals that I do about the success of the organization. What they're here to do is help me with the how. So we're all heading in the same direction. What they're here to do is help us figure out the how. How do we have a better experience for some of our diverse patients that come in? How do we do a better job at having inclusion for our diverse staff so they want to stay here? Even as we bring in bigger numbers, how do we make sure they want to be here? How do we appeal to different markets and give us market insight into different new geographies or new areas that we haven't been into, because those might be more diverse populations? They can help us with the how. And when we create the BRGs and bring them in, we let them know right up front, that's your purpose. Your purpose isn't to be an advocate per se, just for the sake of advocacy for your group. It's to really help make Freighter better by helping us achieve our strategic goals with the very specific and unique insights that you have and your BRG membership. That's what we're really looking for. So when we go in working towards the same goals with very clear direction as to why we created these BRGs, that's very, very helpful for us to work together.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So in order to be able to do that, clearly there has to be a strong linkage between the different executives that are in your team, right, and these BRGs and their leaders. Can you talk a little bit about that? How do you connect those dots so that all of these different components of your organization are communicating with each other, which then helps you to keep that cohesive plan, that singular plan where they're all working toward the same end?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think when we first got started with our first 3 BRGs, we knew we wanted people at the executive level, but we kind of just went out and asked for volunteers. And so what we found is that alignment really does matter. So as we added more BRGs, we especially needed to make sure as we brought in more executives how aligned we were with it. So first of all, when you become a BRG executive sponsor, you are a member of what we call our executive group. So you're at a certain level or above. So you're very senior in our organization, a president, a senior vice president, an executive vice president, number one. Number two, you have a seat at our diversity council. So we've had for a decade a diversity council chaired by me, which brings together executives by, I would say, ex officio site, because you're running an operations. In this case now, because you are an executive sponsor of a BRG, or you're running one of our other key constituents areas like human resources or supply chain for supplier diversity. So we made sure that if you are not there for another reason. If you are an executive sponsor of a BRG, you have to be at the diversity council because you've got to get the whole picture. They're at my senior table, so they have the strategic picture. Now they have the diversity picture. The last piece that we put in place is each of our executives is heavily encouraged to have a community connection. It's an expectation that you join a community board so that because again, we are a very large employer, very large community asset. Now we have gone an extra step of actually realigning some executive sponsorship to make sure that if there's an opportunity for one of our executive sponsors to be participating with a community organization that represents that population, we want that connection also as well. So we realign some of our community participation, say, for example, that serve predominantly the Black African American community with that BRG's executive sponsor, with our Latinx community with that BRG's executive sponsor. Our veterans BRG happens to be headed by a veteran, so making sure that we had some alignment, an ally with our LGBTQ population. So we're just making sure that we increase the alignment because again, we're a big organization and we want to make sure this is very, very integrated and not people kind of off doing their own things. We can be most effective when we're working towards the same goals together.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you and you were describing how your executive sponsors sit on your diversity council and you actually chair that group, you're directly involved in that group. It sounds to me like what you've done is that you have taken two components of best practices and you've integrated them together, because there are a lot of organizations who really run this well, like you do, where they have the BRG groups or the ERG groups, and then they have their executive sponsors sitting in the council. The council is an advisory group. And then above that, they have another type of council, which sometimes is called a steering committee. But you've taken those steering committee elements because you're there and your most senior people of your most senior circle are there, and you've combined them together with the advisory piece and created just one group. And I was wondering, how big is that council and how is it, can you give us a little bit of an idea of how it's structured? Because it sounds like it really brings in some powerful elements from what is a traditional advisory council and a steering committee.
Yeah, you're right. I think how most people might have a steering committee, we've brought that down into our diversity council. So for example, anybody who has an operations lead, so if they lead one of our hospitals, if they lead our clinics, they have to sit on the diversity council because those are the folks who really oversee the majority of the people. So they're kind of ex officio. They have to sit there. Number two, you have to have human resources, obviously. We include supply chain because we have a very big supplier diversity initiative underneath that also as well. Ex officio, they have to sit at the table. Then what we like to have is the leaders of, and now we're pulling them more together, our BRGs and our diversity action teams, kind of a level down in the organization, maybe more middle management who really are more either leading BRGs or they're the real diversity people on the ground in our entities. They're not the executives, but maybe they're directors and managers. They're the more advisory part of the diversity council. So they're really telling us what they're working on and what's actively going on in their areas and the operating areas. And then of course we have the diversity and inclusion staff, also as well, because they're charged with putting together all the pieces underneath. So you're right. I think that we've taken kind of the boots on the ground. We're doing the BRGs. We're the action teams that are out in the entities and brought that into the executives. So they're having those conversations together and at the same time. And again, it's all towards strategy. And then we report on a quarterly basis up to my top level management committee because there's a lot of duplication between the two, just so everybody knows what's going on and where we're heading. The other thing that we do, we have 3, I believe, at-large seats for anybody at the vice president level or above who serves a limited number term. And it's more to just get them acclimated. It's more of a development opportunity that we give to people that are interested in diversity to see how it's actually fits together with all of our strategies. They get more time with me. But we've used that for development. So maybe they don't have one of these ex officio seats, But at the same time, they're interested in knowing more about what we're doing. We allow, by recommendation for development purposes, 3 additional executives to sit there and learn, give their perspectives, but also they're learning about how we do this.
Yeah, I love that model. I just think it's interesting the way that you've pulled those pieces together, because clearly it works. So that's wonderful. So I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about some of the shifts that have happened in the nature of work and how you and your BRG groups have helped you in that particular space. So since COVID-19, there's been a really big shift in the nature of what we call the workplace, or in the way that people are distributed across the workplace. So for example, there was a time when about 94% of the people that worked in the company were in the same place at the same time. Those places could have been varied. You might have had multiple campuses, but anybody who was within that particular area of a particular campus was in that campus around the same time. And you might have had maybe a couple of shift workers that were part of the group that worked in the same place at different times. But for the most part, you had most people in the same place at the same time. And maybe 6%, 5 to 6% that were working remotely. That all changed, obviously, during COVID-19, where about 35% of the workforce ended up working remotely. And the ones that remained in place that had to go in were what we call the essential workers and so forth. And since then, things haven't quite gone back to the way they were. In fact, we've now ended up with this redistribution of people where we still have a larger than prior to COVID number of people that are remote. We have even more people that are working in the same place, but not at the same time. Not just because of shifts, but because of building capacity and safety and social distancing. So we also have people that are working they're working at different times and in different places, using things like, let's say, Google Docs or various types of apps to work on a program together as a team from a different location and coming in to work on it at different times. So by my count, that's 4 dimensions that we have. We used to have one dimension that really held almost everybody, which was same time, same place. That's not the case anymore. Now they're flowing into the other dimensions, which are same time, different place, like the way we're communicating now. We also have same place, but at different times, which is that shift worker model that's expanded. And we have different place and different time. And so what I was wondering is, in terms of your various groups and so forth, can you share a little bit about how they've been operating in that sort of ultra hybrid environment?
Sure. And I think it's really, I'd say, 2 major things. We've always had multiple places, so everybody was at work pretty much at the same time, but we run number of hospitals, number of clinics, we have a corporate center. So it was, quite frankly, it was rough for our BRGs who only knew how to meet live, because we really didn't have all this great video technology at the time to really gather people. So they tended to gather around community events, because that's another big thing our BRGs do, is they show up in their communities, in the communities that we serve. And that was really their major way to bring people together and create community. But that didn't happen very often. Maybe once or twice a year was that happening. So technology has been amazing for these BRGs, because now we're working in more places because of all the remote dispersion that we're seeing. But we've got this technology that can bring people together. So they're actually meeting much more often than they used to be, because they can just go to a video screen, and be able to do that. So it's increased our membership pretty significantly in some of our longer standing BRGs. So I think it's been a great vehicle for bringing more people into the BRG, number one. Number 2, with our remote work, and the majority of our work is still, we're a health system, so the majority of our work is still face-to-face and in place. But we still have 1,800 people who are dispersed and are working still remote, not even hybrid. You want to stay connected with those people. And now we're employing people actually in 26 states. So I know because we do hire 100% remote people. So I know the big debate right now among a lot of CEOs, multi-industry CEOs, is, do you really like this remote stuff? Do we really like hybrid? What's it going to do to your culture if you have people who have never been at your place, you're just remote? And what we were trying to do is, first, there's a lot of leader work we're doing, but how do you create groups, virtual groups, that somebody can join and feel like they belong to Freighter Health? The BRGs are a perfect way to do that. So you can find your affinity, within Freighter Health, and you can join virtually. You can live in Illinois, you can live in Minnesota, you can live in the South somewhere, and you can be part of Freighter Health because you're part of the Black African American BRG, or the LGBTQA BRG, or the Veterans BRG, or the Women's Leadership BRG, or the Latinx BRG, and feel part of something. So I think that, number one, the opportunity is immense with video. That's the good thing of coming out of this pandemic. As we've all learned how to connect a different way, I think that's been an amazing boost to our BRGs. And then number two, they're a huge piece of how we can create connectedness and whole culture together also as well. So they've been really great for us in that regard as well.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking you guys really found the silver lining in this cloud.
We have to. It's not done yet. We still have to. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But as you're talking about it, I'm thinking, wow, that really does make sense that these BRGs and ERGs that have been able to operate in many cases remotely to some degree in order to bring in members that are not in the same location, that they become an extension of your culture. They become sort of the cultural lifeboat that you can get more people on in the absence of having the opportunity to bring everybody together in the same place. And I think that becomes an even more and more important component of maintaining an organization's culture as more people move into those 4 dimensions that we were talking about, because technology and everything else that's marching forward is actually pointing to a future where we're moving toward having more people in those different buckets. So I think that a lot of the work that you guys are doing are actually putting you ahead of the curve there in terms of getting ready for that future. So, in those companies where perhaps ERGs or BRGs don't have that senior level of visibility, and where they're kind of missing out on seeing some of these opportunities that you're seeing because you have that proximity and you're able to see those opportunities. What do you think are some of the obstacles that keep them off the CEO's radar or senior leadership's radar? And how can we remove those?
I would say number one is that alignment of goals. So if you have an organization that the BRGs are a nice thing to do, and you've got them kind of parked over here, they're seen as an employee engagement effort or something like that, but they're not working on strategic goals that help the CEO's success, they're going to stay parked over here. And then they're going to be a nice to do type of thing. And maybe a CEO gets involved once a year or something like that. If they're integral to your success and you're working on the same goals and you are critical to the CEO's success, because you're going to make your strategy and your plans better because of the insight that the BRG members bring you, then you're going to get a lot more time, effort, focus, and attention from your CEO. So I think, again, it depends on how you're structuring. If D&I, BRGs, and everything around it are a nice to do and not critical to do, then you're going to get a nice to do level of attention from your executives. If they're critical and integrated and you have the same goals, you're working in the same way, you're going to get a lot more attention because people know that they're important. And they know that you have to listen to those insights, because if we don't get those insights, there's no way we can be successful. We just can't serve all of our multiple stakeholders if we're not getting those insights. So I think that's number one. Once you've established them as important, the most precious thing on a CEO has to spend is our time. It's not our money, it's our time. It is the thing we don't have ever enough of, and which you have to constantly prioritize. And so you have to make time for the things that are most important, and you will make time for the things that are the most important things to your success. So for me, I get a report from my BRGs every quarter at a minimum, because their input is in our diversity council, which I meet with quarterly. And then I make it a point to have at least one annual conversation, at least one, with either the BRG leaders or all BRG. Now that we do video, I do it with all the BRG members. It used to be just when we bring their leaders together for strategic planning. But now I'm able to meet with all of them because we can do virtual technology, and that enables that a lot better. So because I know those insights are so important to the success of where we execute our strategies, then that time gets prioritized, and we do that, and we spend time on it.
Yeah, makes sense. So Kathy, let me ask you this then. What are some of the qualities that you think resource group leaders need to develop to make sure that they pop up on that CEO's radar? Because you were talking about how the groups need to find that alignment or find ways or have ways of adding value to things that are important to the larger business and so forth. And I think to a great degree, what positions a group to be able to do that effectively is the group leader. Whoever that group leader is, that person who is running that group, leading that group, and to some degree setting the agenda for that group. What are some of the qualities that you think that they need to have and develop in order to make sure that their groups pop up on that CEO's radar?
Yeah, so we're very deliberate about how we reach out to people who we want to lead the BRGs, because we really see it as part of our overall development program. So if you're going to be, so number one, they are leaders. They're not vice presidents. They're usually middle management as to we're reaching out to be the leaders of our BRGs, but we are pretty selective about how we do that. We want our high performers. We want people who we want to be with us. We want people who we want to invest in, because this is going to be an experience that will help grow them. So we look at it through that vein. And then they're also probably bringing better leadership skills because of the way they're selected. They're high performers. We definitely want to invest in their future. So I would say that's number one. Number two, understand the role as a leader of a BRG. You are not here just to advocate for your agenda or the agenda of the BRG. You're here. The BRG exists to make Freighter Health more successful in our strategies. So they don't exist to be an affinity group where people can just meet and greet and be a social thing. This is a business reason. We're here to help Freighter Health be better, but through your unique ability to help us do that. So again, I think it's that alignment of expectation to help those leaders understand their role and what their success is to do that. After that, we support them. So there are staff and our diversity and inclusion teams who helps them understand how to organize a meeting. How do they set goals? How do they go about bringing in more members? What are Freighter's goals? How do you get acclimated to that? Which is, again, a fantastic development experience for these leaders, to be able to do that. I think that they also need to be credible, informal leaders, because a lot of times, and I have found this throughout my career, they're a BRG leader, but they're going to have members from all over the organization. These aren't people who, quote unquote, report to them. These are people who voluntarily are giving of their time, all the BRG members, to help contribute toward Freighter's success through the eyes of the particular stakeholder group for which their BRG was formed. So I think that it's, you need to have people who people want to be with, be our leaders. So again, we kind of screen for those credible leaders in our organization. And then again, we help them, with that alignment. I am sure that I know there is a lot of preparation before they have a BRG meeting, period. I know there's even more before they have one with me. They always come very well prepared with questions that they've gotten from their members in advance who want to ask me, but I take open mic questions also as well. It's not just pre-screened and only approved and all that kind of stuff. We do take open questions or open, let me tell you about this, Kathy, this is what happened to me last week types of things. That's part of my learning. That's why I want to be there. It can't be It can't just be Kathy only wants to answer these 5 questions. I'm there really to listen, to them also as well. So I know that our diversity and inclusion staff helps our BRG leaders prepare for those sessions. So again, they've got the CEO's time, they've got the CEO's ear. How do they make that a most effective use of time and effort to do that to both ends, so that the BRGs are heard, but at the same time, you're helping us help Freighter do our job better. So that's really, I think, the framing and how we've helped the leaders of the BRGs be successful. And we have always had leaders. Now maybe behind the scenes, they struggle sometimes to get leaders to step up. I don't know. But I think for the most part, we've had plenty of leaders who wanted to come forward and wanted to participate in the organization and be a leader. There's usually one leader of the BRG, but a couple of officers in the wings. So just not one person is carrying, the full burden. There's a couple of people who are actually help organizing in each BRG.
Yeah, that's great. So Kathy, if you were in a room right now with, let's say, a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000 of your peers who are CEOs, who perhaps may not have that level of contact with their resource groups, what would be your advice to them in terms of why they should do it and how they should go about doing it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we've had some of these conversations here in Milwaukee as we start to get much, much more deliberate about being a diverse and inclusive community. And there's some of us, in fact, actually maybe roughly 10 companies who are going to really kind of mentor some of the other, companies to help them bring it along. So I think the why, I just can explain it. The reason why we do it, is that we cannot be successful. I mean, I think you truly as a CEO have to believe that you cannot be successful unless you have a successful program to attract, retain, and develop in a diverse workforce. Number one, you have to believe that. And if your customer base is diverse, like ours is, in an urban setting with many, many different diverse populations, we can't be successful if we can't take care of those people and do it in an appropriate way. So I think first as a CEO, and I do believe that still exists, there isn't the business reason behind, not everybody has declared that and believes that in their own space. If this is still a nice to do versus a must do, you're going to have a different perspective as a CEO on that. So I think we've talked about this before, Joe, there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of studies that companies with diverse boards and companies with diverse management teams are more successful by the numbers. You can see it, and there's a lot of that, but until you live that and embrace that, I think you're not going to give it your time and attention, number one. Number two, again, what works for us, I wouldn't set it off to the side. Go get me a D&I plan. It's got to be part of your strategic plan, because if it's that important, it's going to drive your strategy. So you have to make that important. And then I think as to the BRGs, and people call them different things, ERGs, BRGs, affinity groups, and everything. People use them for different reasons. Sure, we use them for staff engagement also because different things we do come across differently to different diverse parts of our workforce, so that it helps us interpret our strategy. But again, they're not here to be, quote unquote, just advocates for their group. They're here to help drive and make Freighter a better place. But the last personal thing I would say is you don't know me, being a white female, you don't know anything about what your diverse staff is going through day to day in your hallways and in your community unless you are having that conversation. Because that is, and I would say to my male counterparts, you don't know anything about what it's like to be a woman leader unless you actually have that conversation, because we just don't have those experiences, and you can't even imagine it unless somebody's willing to tell you that. And so creating that space, and you can't possibly deal with it unless you know what's going on. And so you're running around with blinders on as a CEO and a leader if you are not aware of what is going on in your hallways and in your community. That is the most powerful thing I can say to get one of my peers to come on board. And I actually heard that same speech from one of my peers here in Milwaukee, who ran a very large, at the time, ran a very large health system here, because he had started doing that with his own ERGs and around, particularly in that case, diverse leadership, and did not understand some of the barriers that his own organization, we do the same, have put in place. You can't remove them until you know what they are. So I mean, that's what I would say would be my last. There's all the business reasons for it. I think they're well documented, and the how to do it. But until you've actually sat down and had that conversation, you have no idea what's going on in your organization unless you talk to people who are living it and going through it. And that's extremely powerful.
Yeah, no, fantastic. That's very well said. And it's part of our human condition, whether a CEO or anyone else in the world, we all have our own blinders that are the limits of our own experience and perspectives. And that's why we need each other. So that's a fantastic point. So Kathy, thank you again for joining us today. It's really been, as always, a pleasure having you here.
I love it. Thank you for the opportunity, Joe. You can tell this is something I'm passionate about, and I love it.
Absolutely. Thanks again. And so that concludes the interview part. Any questions that you have either out there in Facebook world or in here? We've got a couple of more minutes because I know Kathy's got to jump off of this probably in the next 6 minutes or so. So if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to put up, now is the time to do it. You can either, at this point, since we're not recording, you can feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to just say what it is that you have in your mind, or you can type it into chat and I'll see it. And then I'll be your voice if you're somewhere noisy where you can't unmute yourself. And I'm also looking at the Facebook side of the equation here, just to make sure, just to see if any comments come through on this end. So folks, floor is yours. This is a great opportunity to put your questions out there. So, while we're waiting to see if anybody comes through with any questions, Kathy, I have to tell you that you sound like you and your organization have gone through an interesting evolution in terms of how you've done things. There are some elements of what you do, like what I noted before, in the way your council structure is set up, to mix both the elements of the steering committee and the advisory piece together, which I think are really intriguing, because we live in a world where decisions have to be made so quickly that the flatter that you make, and those connections, and the more frictionless you make them, the better you're able to respond to things that are coming at us at such high speed, right? I mean, we have changes coming at us at an unprecedented speed at this point.
That's right.
So I have a question I think that I saw here. It just scrolled right past me real quick. Okay. It's Juan. He's saying, how did benchmarking against similarly situated companies play a role in creating your DEI culture?
That's a great question, because, the hard thing is there's not a lot of public benchmarks out there. So probably I would say what really helped to drive us is there are a number of organizations who are setting out pledges, so they start with the American Hospital Association, our Milwaukee Metropolitan Chamber. So what we really started to do, the Equity Collaborative that we belong to for women's leadership. So what we really started our journey on is that we took on the pledges, and said that that's kind of benchmark behavior. Not necessarily you have to hit X percentage or something of your workforce, but let's at least start with the pledges. And so that's really what I would say started setting us on a course. So what we found, we are actually about to publicly make available pieces of our diversity dashboard. And my board has asked me, well, how does this compare to others? And I said, I couldn't tell you, because nobody else puts their data out there. But I think if we put our data out there, that could be a start of making this very, very transparent. So that's how we've gone about it, is when the industry or the metropolitan area puts out pledges, we join in and say, we're going to do that.
Excellent. So as you were answering that question, I had a comment and another question posted. The comment was this person didn't have a comment. It's one of the other member organizations, but they really enjoyed this and found it inspiring. And they've already picked up the link so that they can pass it on to some of the leaders in their organization as well. And so one of the questions that came through, it's from Melissa. And her question is, what value is placed on the assignment of leading a BRG? Is it recognized as a performance success for those that participate, or is it seen as extracurricular activity?
No, it's actually seen as performance success. So we have a development piece of our performance evaluations for leaders. For right now, leaders, it'll be for all of our staff, and you count that. And that's part of your individual development plan. So it absolutely counts in terms of your performance evaluation. Number one, we also do track our community service hours. So particularly for leadership, so if one of our BRGs is doing a community event, which they often do, that tracks for what we call our Freighted in Action hours that we encourage and that we do track, and that also is part of your performance evaluation as well. So this is real. It's not just, again, nice to do. It's something that you get rewarded for doing in terms of your performance in your development plan.
That's fantastic. So Kathy, I don't see any more questions, but I have one more question. And I know I only have like a minute and a half of your time. And that question is, in your organization, as you look at this, I mean, to me, this looks like it's become also a leadership development engine for you, because as people lead these groups, they're actually leading this sort of microcosm of an organization, and it prepares them to do more and take on more scope in other areas. And it sounds to me like that's something that you guys are leveraging. Can you just give us a quick example of that, or a quick sort of overview of how you're doing that over at Freighted?
Yeah, I would say right now we're still nascent at. We have a very developed executive development plan, so I can tell you those who are executive sponsors, for example, that shows up on their quote unquote Freighted resume that gets reviewed by our board. So it's very, very visible when they are leading a BRG and also on a community board and all these other kind of things. So that's very visible. We're starting to build that more into our management development track experiences, that they're leading that aren't necessarily just in their job description. And this would be one of them. So we are very, very much leveraging this into our development program as well.
That's fantastic. So Kathy, I know you got 1 minute to rock it out of here and catch your transportation. Thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. And I hope that you got as much value and inspiration out of this as I did. And I'll be back in touch when we have our next episode recording. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.